Here with me in studio is Judge Vanessa Gilmore, a former U.S. District Court judge. Welcome. Good to have you. A lot of people, chattering about this. And first of all, just how likely could mandatory terms happen, and even age limits?
Well, you're right, Lisa. A lot of people are very dissatisfied with the Supreme Court right now. And the issue of whether or not there can be either mandatory retirements or age limits or a set number of terms that a justice might serve is something that was the subject of a study that a commission that President Biden formed last year decided to look at. They wrote a nearly 300-page report on the issue, and they looked at, one, whether or not the Supreme Court could be expanded in any way, but the secondary issue that you just raised, which is whether or not term limits could be set. And I think that they came to the conclusion that there is still a debate on whether or not that would require a constitutional amendment, because as we know now, the Constitution says that Supreme Court justices are appointed for life. And so they looked at whether or not that would require a constitutional amendment or whether or not Congress could actually take up that issue themselves.
How likely will this discussion be picked up, or could this discussion be picked up anytime soon?
Even among those scholars and experts who looked at the issue on behalf of the commission, there were 34 of them that were making up that commission. They could not come up with a definitive decision. They were split on how it should go. Half felt that the issue could be taken up by Congress. The other half felt like it had to be taken up as a constitutional amendment, and they could not come to a clear decision. And so I think that reflects the uncertainty of that actually coming to be. If it has to be done as a constitutional amendment, of course, that means it has to go back to the people to decide. And I think the likelihood of that depends on the will of the people to actually see an amendment at this time.
For sure. This may sound harsh, but it seems like we sit and watch our justices age out of the system. And it seems like term limits or age limits would be practical. What are your thoughts there?
I think that there are good reasons to believe that. The last three justices who left the court, either through retirement or as Ruth Ginsburg did through death, were all in their 80s. Justice Thomas is the longest serving justice. He's been on 30 years. If he stays on until he's 90, he will have served on the court for 47 years. A lot of people think that is too long of a time for one person to be sitting with the kinds of issues that they're facing that involve newer issues and newer technologies and different ideas than have been in the past. If Amy Coney Barrett stays on as long as Ruth Bader Ginsburg did, she'll be on the court until 2059. And that's quite a long time. That's quite a long time.
Yeah, I can't see the light at the end of that tunnel. Are you surprised that it took an issue like Roe v. Wade to pique the interest of the country to sit back and look at the Supreme Court and say, hey, something may not be right here?
Well, even though the AP poll on the issue just came out yesterday, there have been polls over the last couple of years by Quinnipiac, by Gallup, by Annenberg, all of whom came to the same sort of conclusion in terms of what people's feelings are about the Supreme Court.
Yeah, and your thoughts, has this piqued your interest, in the past? And is it practical to really think that this could happen?
I am just encouraged to see people so engaged in understanding the significance of the role of the Supreme Court and how important their decision making is to what happens in everyday life. Now people see it coming all the way down to impacting people that they know, and I'm just happy to see that happening.
A lot of this conversation boils down to trust. And a lot of people out there, and as the poll indicated, mainly Democrats, don't trust the makeup of the Supreme Court. Do you find that at all surprising?
I think that even as the commission looked at the idea of expanding the number of justices on the court, they did not feel that would give people any more confidence in what the Supreme Court decision-making process would be about. I think that the lack of confidence in the Supreme Court started with their decision in Citizens United, when they decided that corporations were people, and it's gone downhill since then. I wish that there could be more confidence in the Supreme Court, but right now I understand the American people and their lack of confidence in the court at this time.
Yeah, when the Supreme Court spoke, you listened, whenever there was a decision coming down, and you respected that. So what do you think is needed if the term limits don't change and the age limits don't change? What do you think is needed to revive trust in the Supreme Court?
There were a couple of other things that the commission looked at. One, they looked at more transparency on the court. That's one of the few places where there are no cameras in the courtroom.
Happening.
You don't know what's
happening. Being talked about.
And so they're encouraging either live feed, live stream of the actual arguments or cameras in the courtroom. The justices pushed back against that. But the other issue that they looked at were ethical considerations and ethical issues, and whether or not there should be a code of conduct for Supreme Court justices, similar to the code of conduct that applies to other United States district judges like myself when I was on the court, and whether or not there should be any punishments that are attached to particular things that justices might do.
Wow.
There's some debate about whether or not they should or can do that, but it is something that has been definitely discussed as a means, as you said, of encouraging more confidence by the public in the Supreme Court.
I think a lot of people like that idea, cameras in the courtroom, because you just don't know what's going on.
You don't know what's going on. Yeah. There's cameras every place else, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But not in the Supreme Court.
You are a pleasure. Thank you so much for your insight. Judge Vanessa Gilmore, thank you so much.